Yeah, exactly.
Hi. Design assignment. Are we supposed to redesign the existing app, or are we coming up with something new?
Probably somewhere in between, ideally, something that like exists, but you're making an improvement.
Okay. What if we can't think of that many of those?
You only need one at the end of the day, right?
Meet up with
Yeah, just like bounce some ideas. It's not that much stuff.
So for the coding project I submitted, I didn't realize this, but it kind of spells like fuck on the top.
Several people did that.
I didn't do that on purpose.
One person that titled their project F***. They get the award for best title.
I was actually gonna put that about FCKD. My girlfriend said it was a bit offensive. Might get in trouble.
I am very difficult to offend. Good morning. How's everybody doing? Less concerned about programming than last week? Last I checked, there were still individual programming assignment ones trickling in. So. All right, we are going to start today, as we do, by talking about nothing because my clicker doesn't work. So there. By talking about an interface. What is this? A microwave. Let's talk about, it's one microwave twice. I just wasn't sure which one was easier to see. I think that one, maybe. What can you tell me about this microwave and any potential usability issues you might see? For bonus points, frame your discussion in terms of today's topic. Somebody. Yep.
Something like one of the dishes which you want to make, say something like you don't know how long to put it for. There's no picture for them, so it's like very, very specific.
Okay, so we have these pictures of like specific things like fresh vegetables. I'm close to it, so I can read it. Baked potato, fresh vegetables, frozen vegetables, snacks, reheat, beverage, popcorn. So yeah, you do have a problem if you have a specific food in your hand that doesn't happen to have an icon that goes with it. What do? Who knows? Yeah.
Also, if you have like a large portion of one of those foods, do you just press the button and does it work?
Right.
Or do you have to?
Is there more magic? By the way, everybody tell me your names. I need to start like yelling names at people even if they're wrong. What's that?
Nalin.
Nareen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Emily.
Emily. Okay, what else we got? Yeah.
Clear button is a little more loud with the start button, so I feel like I definitely I'm not sure I can start.
All right, so there's a visual pop to the clear button that the start button lacks. Maybe you could imagine a reason for that, like, oh no, I didn't mean to microwave that. But yeah, you would tend to gravitate towards that button. Yes?
So so I can't really see that clearly, but it looks like under the numbers it says like express.
Yeah, express cook.
It says that on my microwave, but then so that means if you press like the 1, it just automatically says 1 minute. And in order to do like 1 minute and 4 seconds or something more specific, you have to press the button before you have to do it.
Yeah, you'll notice if you do like user studies of microwaves, lots of people microwave things for 1 minute and 39 seconds, and nobody microwaves things for 1 minute and 40 seconds. Why is that? Yes. So microwaves will let you put in 99 and hit enter. And so people all the time microwave things for 1 minute and 39 seconds, but never ever for 1 minute and 40. All right. Yes.
So they have power level button there, and how does that correlate with the kind of food you're trying to eat? Does it mean that if you want something extra hot, you better press it twice, or what is power level?
Yeah. So who here has a microwave or access to a microwave? Who here ever uses the power level button? Okay. So it turns out that the power level button is like radically important to proper usage of the microwave. And it's actually the whole reason that these buttons up here exist is to give you another way into the power level button that is supposed to be less confusing. But like to use a microwave right, you're supposed to do like all sorts of tricky stuff with the power level where like you start on high and you go to low. And so like the reheat and defrost and popcorn buttons do that sort of thing for you automatically. Yeah.
I just want to say the popcorn button, it never works. Like you always get burnt popcorn or like just
So your popcorn is not as delicious as the icon would suggest.
not as
It's tragic. Way back.
In terms of culture specific, for example, snacks can be defined differently in every country.
Yeah, so there's definitely like a cultural bias here in terms of the slice of pizza. Like pizza is nearly universal, but it's not totally universal. If you came to this thing, and didn't know what that was, had no idea what this icon was supposed to be, then you may be confused. You're doubly doomed if you don't read English, because now you don't know what it says and you don't know what the thing is. So a lot of what we're talking about here in this discussion is talking about how the user perceives this thing when they walk up to it and try to just read it. And indeed, that is kind of the topic of discussion for today, conceptual models and things. One more example in this space. Seriously, what the hell? What are these? Remotes? Whose remotes? Comcast, Apple TV, and something. It's a thing. Talk to me about the like signifiers and affordances of this thing. So what do you want to do with them when you see them? Press all the buttons. That would be fun. Are the buttons clear? Like, do you know what the buttons will do?
Most Apple TV.
All right, which ones are less clear? Yeah.
Like I've had Comcast for like 10 years and I still don't know what those 5 black ones at the bottom do.
Okay. They are the picture-in-picture for all those people that have picture-in-picture TVs, which they barely even make anymore. Yeah.
The remote on the right, what do you need the RGYB for?
That's pretty fancy. No idea. Yeah.
As someone that's never owned an Apple TV, I really would have no idea how to like switch inputs on the Apple TV or do I with the remote because there's so many functionalities but so few buttons.
If you're an Apple user, you only need one input. Yeah, agreed. It doesn't jump out to you and explain itself. Yep.
I'm wondering if the RGY is just like red, green, yellow, blue, but I don't really know what.
So I think that if you've ever seen the TiVo remote has 4 buttons, RGYB, and they're those colors, and you can map them to like whatever you want to map them to. But I'm guessing that that's the TiVo buttons that they put on there. Yeah.
I've used Apple TV before, but I don't know whether the silver part, which is in the center of the dial, is actually a button or not.
Yeah, so it doesn't signify automatically to you whether you want to like push it or move it. Is it a joystick? Is it a button? What is it? I agree. There's one other thing I want to cover here. Yeah.
On the Comcast remote, you have to select what device you're using at the top.
True.
And the buttons have like totally different meaning.
Yeah, so the Comcast remote is super modal, whereas these other two are a little less modal. And what I mean by that, and we'll dig into that a bunch next sometime. I just wrote those slides. But sometime we'll dig into modality, which is where the remote will do different things based on what mode it's in. And a big example of that here is that these like directional pad buttons will do very different things based on like what's going on the screen. So like nothing inherent about the remote tells you anything about what those directional buttons is going to do. There's one more back here.
It's not clear, like if you hit the wrong button, how you can go back.
Yeah, so error recovery is a little bit tricky. I happen to know that the magic button on the Comcast remote is right there. It's the exit button, then that's usually what takes you back one layer. But if you don't know that, you're doomed. So anyway, something to think about. Like as you walk around and check out artifacts in the world, think about what they say to you, what they signify to you. This is tragic. I have to touch the keyboard like an animal. All right, so task analysis review. Last week we talked about how you figure out, there's seats like all over the place in the middle, guys, just push. Don't sit on the edges. All right, so we talked about how you figure out like what your users actually need and how you go about like addressing those problems. And task analysis was just about going out into the world, seeing what people do, seeing how people feel about the technologies that they're using, observing existing practices, and then building those like personas and storyboards and scenarios and things that we talked about in the previous lecture. So just as a review, these are the task analysis questions that we recommend that you think about. But again, this is not a list I expect you to memorize. It's just sort of a general guideline for how you go about thinking about this sort of problem and what you want to know about the context in which you're deploying a product. And then we talked briefly at the end, and you read quite a bit about the sort of master-apprentice model for doing task analysis, which is under this broader banner of contextual inquiry. And this is just a formalized, very good, as it turns out, way of going out and observing existing practices by digging into kind of the work habits of real people. Any questions in review on that stuff? All right, well, don't forget about it, because the first assignment that you'll do as a group, maybe the second assignment you'll do as a group, will be to go out and do some of this task analysis work and like start figuring out the context of your users. And so we'll be swinging back to a lot of these kind of core concepts again as we go through the group project. So today is kind of Cog Sci Day. Raise your hand if you're an actual cognitive scientist. Hooray. All right, so forgive us for what we're about to do to your field in 90 minutes. But we're kind of looking at the slice of cognitive science that is useful to user interface designers and that helps people figure out, helps us as designers know how people learn, know how people perceive, know how people will interact with interfaces. So in 1 or 2 sentences, what is an affordance? Somebody. Yeah.
It might be a feature or a property of the product that kind of lends itself to being used a certain way.
Okay, so that's kind of half of the story, is it's about like how or in what ways a thing can be used. What's the other half of it? Who really bonded with Don Norman doing this reading? I have a picture of him on the next slide, if that'll help. Yeah?
It's based on perceptions of the user.
Yeah, so it's these kind of, this two-sided deal where like users come in with some expectations and products signify some set of things you can do with them. And somewhere in the middle between those two things are affordances, which are the things that the user knows they can do with the product. So saith Don Norman in The Design of Everyday Things. We had you read chapter 1 of Norman, which is a good chapter. The whole book is worth reading. If you're really interested in design, go out and buy it. And then also the optional reading by Jeff Raskin is my favorite book and probably in the world. So if you're into like user experience design, really go read the Humane Interface also. Anyway, an affordance is this relationship between the properties of a physical object and the capabilities of a person that help you determine how an object could be used. And so chairs are the like canonical affordance example. So chairs afford sitting, and chairs afford lifting if the user happens to be strong. And the reason I like the like lifting thing is imagine somebody in like a bar fight and they pick up a chair and they're like bam and they hit somebody with their chair. That's an affordance if like in that moment of like, oh shit, somebody's gonna punch me in the face, you think, but I could pick this up and hit somebody with it. Like that's boom an affordance where you just immediately know, there's seats all over in the middle, force your way in there. If you just immediately in an instant know that this is what you can do with the thing, that's an affordance. Cool? All right, so what do knobs afford? Turning. Why do you know that? Because you've turned a bunch of freaking knobs, right? So that's the key thing to understand here is that there's nothing magical about a doorknob necessarily that signifies turning. It's just that you have used artifacts like this before, and you know that they turn, and you know that if you try to turn that thing, you'll probably get into the place that you're trying to go. How about buttons? Buttons afford pushing. They also signify pushing, usually, which we'll talk about in a second. What does glass afford? All right, seeing through, looking beyond. What else? Yeah.
Breaking.
Breaking. If you happen to have had experience or seen that happen, you know that glass affords breaking. Yep.
Shelter protection.
Yeah, so glass has a protective property to it, keep you nice and dry.
Reflection.
Okay, glass can be reflective, which is good and bad for our purposes in interface design. Cool? All right, but again, the point of the story is that affordances are not just properties of objects. And get this right, because when I interview you for your user experience job, I want to know that you know the difference between these things. But like affordances are cultural. They are relationships between a person and an object such that a person knows how to interact with that object. And indeed, these things like breakability of glass are a good example of that, where that's just something you kind of have to know. Like, if you had a magic material in front of you, you may or may not know that like shattering spectacularly is part of its deal. But if you know something about glass, then you know that that thing affords shattering. Signifiers, on the other hand, are what people usually mean when they say affordance, and they're wrong. Signifiers are the things of an object that tell you how to use it. And so it's the signifiers that we're interested in, usually as user experience designers. We want to signal to the world that this is how you use the thing. So for instance, chairs afford sitting, and they signal that by having a flat surface held by legs, which is kind of understood to be sit on me. And so if you walked up to like a random object in the world and it had 4 legs and a flat surface and it was about city height, then you might think, yeah, that thing is signaling to me that I should sit upon it, right? It's signifying that. Do chairs afford lifting? In what way do chairs signal that you should lift them? Yeah.
Jonathan, and the fact that they're not stuck to the ground, you can just move them. And
all right, so they have this property of movability. Yeah.
They have like protruding limbs.
Yeah, I mean, you just want to grab that chair and hit somebody with it. It's just asking for it. Yeah. How about knobs? Do knobs signal turning? Not really. I mean, sort of, they're round and pleasant, and maybe you would want to turn it, but it doesn't scream to me like, try turning me. How about buttons? Do buttons signal pushing? Yeah, so I think like if you've seen like the Staples big red like easy button, like that thing wants you to hit it. That is signaling pushability. Whereas on the other hand, this button here, which is the home button on an iPhone, I'm not so totally sure about that. It's kind of like indented. That looks, to me, that's signaling that it wants me to like rest my finger upon it, but it doesn't scream push me to me. Does glass signal see-through ability? Yeah, yes. You walk up to it and you can see through it. Good job, glass. How about breaking? Does glass signal its fragility? Not typically, right? So that's something that you just have to know, that you have to have learned at some point that that's a deal with glass. All right, signifiers. Look at this thing. Think about the signifiers and affordances of this. Write down like 3 signifiers and 3 affordances of that there pair of scissors. We get like 3 seats in row 2, 1 seat in row 5. We have 2 broken seats in row 2. Somebody should fix those. How do you like submit a help ticket here? Somebody be entrepreneurial and go submit a help ticket? All right, talk to me about the signifiers of those there scissors. Somebody I haven't heard from today. Yeah.
So the sharp blades are kind of signifiers because they signify that they can use to cut.
Yeah, I like that. So they have these sort of overt appearance of sharpness that is indicative of what you should do with them. Back there. Yeah.
Byron, so the pointiness of it signifies that stab, maybe.
Okay, they signify an affordance for stabbing. They are not safety scissors. Right here.
And the hinge shows you that you can like only open them a certain amount and like one way. Kind of.
Yeah, so if you know a lot about like hinges, then you can start to derive some properties of the actual mechanical action of the thing through the physical appearance of the hinge itself. Agreed? Right here.
Michelle, and the holes signify that you can.
Yeah, so the holes really call out to you. Like they've highlighted them in purple for you and they're nice and plastic. And this seems like the sort of pair of scissors that's trying to teach you, like, don't grab it by the pointy end. Grab it by this end over here. Much nicer. So yeah, I agree. It signifies that. Yep.
Not only that you shouldn't just grab it like you would like a pair of shears, but you would grab it with like maybe more fingers and a larger hole.
Yeah, so it's really screaming at you, like put one finger, probably a thumb here and a bunch of fingers here. Yeah.
Jasmine, so the blades on one side is more blunt and then on the inside it kind of curves inwards, so it signifies that you're using it in the middle for cutting and the sides are more blunt, so you're not going to use it like as a knife or something.
Agreed. So it sort of signifies cutty and not knifey. Agreed. How about affordances? What are the affordances of this thing? Yeah. Cutting. That's a good affordance of a scissor. So you know that this thing affords cutting. Yeah. Okay, being held. And more specifically, it affords kind of like one-hand cutting and cutting of paper and things that you know about, scissors are true. Hooray. All right, door handles. Talk to me about the signifiers of these 2 door handles. Which is more appealing to you as a handle? This one? Okay. Are these push or pull? Okay. Is this push or pull? Okay. I'm sure you're right about the one on the left. I'm not sure you're right about the one on the right. So here's an example of like horrible things being done with doors. So if you read somebody asked on Piazza about the old version of Psychology of Everyday Things versus the new Design of Everyday Things. Same book, just with a new foreword and some updates throughout. If you read the foreword of the newer edition, the 2002 edition, Norman talks about how people always walk up to him and want to talk about Don Norman doors. Anyway, those are examples of Norman doors, doors that are very difficult to like discern the affordances of. So could you do better? If you were designing doors from scratch, could you signify push or pull more effectively? Yeah.
I mean, you could follow the same idea that they did in the car, where you could have the door handle pull out. It's like clearly if it's going to be.
Yeah, so you could recess it in an obvious way. Right here.
So you could, if you wanted to simplify push, you could like have something that you're not actually able to grasp.
Okay, so you can make it physically difficult to pull. Yeah.
Such as a plate or some flat surface that's
Yeah.
easy.
Something that like you really have to lean into. Way back right.
People already know how buttons work, so you can just put really big buttons.
Okay. So I would argue that that is more or less what this kind of door is it sort of has a big button associated with it. It kind of obviously affords pushing. This one has the same sort of like mechanical action where it doesn't really encourage you to pull it, although I would argue it's not as good as this one. And then you have the like canonical like handle that really wants to be pulled. Although sometimes people put those on pushes because they're bad people. Okay, one side issue here on signifiers and affordances is that these really are cultural. So quick, hands up if that light switch is turned off. Hands up if that light switch is turned on. Okay, where are you from? There are certain electrical systems in the world where just by default down is on, and there are certain electrical systems in the world where by default down is off. Most of the time in the US down is off, but not always. Most of the time in the UK down is on. So it varies. I think most of the time in India down is on. Various places have kind of reversed versions of that. And so the important thing here is to understand that the way the user interprets signifiers and turns them into affordances is cultural. So they bring with them experience, knowledge, just a world of background that comes to bear on this particular problem. The other big example of that we see a lot is colors. So different colors mean different things in different cultures. In the US, we tend to think of red as being like bad and green as being good, but that's really kind of strictly a cultural thing. That's not an inherent thing. And so you have to think about these things as you put together interfaces, and as you put together experiences. Like, am I really communicating what I want to communicate? Anybody else have a good example of that sort of thing? Yeah.
Knobs.
Okay.
Turn them clockwise or counterclockwise.
All right, so knobs tend to be reversed in various contexts. That can be not only cultural, but also like contextual, because like different domains tend to think of that in different ways. Yeah.
Keys, when you insert a key, it's always the other way around.
Really interesting. All right, so let me think about that.
Side is off over here. Yeah. But for me, it was always the other way.
Uh-huh.
There's a big challenge.
Yeah. So in my mind, you turn away from the hinge to lock and towards the hinge to unlock. Right? Yeah, because like the door is here and the door hinge, and you open it this way, you go that way to lock, right?
Oh, the hinge.
Yeah. So like you go towards the, interesting. Any others? Yeah.
A peace sign can be a sign of invitation in one culture, and a sign to stay away in another.
Sure. Okay. So very like specific American iconography can go horribly awry in other contexts. Agreed. Yep.
First person shooter, some people play inverted.
They're correct. Like the Y should always be inverted. Yeah, so different people, if you go and pick up your buddy's like Xbox controller, everything could be upside down. Agreed? Yeah.
Scrolling in your Windows PCs versus your
Oh,
mouse.
God. Okay. That's religious, not cultural, but close enough. Yes, so since I moved to using this thing at work every day, every time I go home and use my Windows machine, it's like, why can't I scroll? Oh, I'm at the top and I'm scrolling the wrong way. Agreed. All sorts of good things in there. All right. You have to be careful with your signifiers because every single little thing you put into your user interface, somebody will try to do something with. And so this is an example of somebody like, well, I want to use the mouse. I must like get my finger up in there. There's buttons and things in there. I want to use those. Who remembers ball mice, by the way? Hooray. We used to have these mice that had little mice balls in them. Cool. So here's a video. Enjoy.
Please. Computer? Computer? Ah. Hello, computer.
Just use the keyboard.
Keyboard. Oh, great.
What fun. So this is about cultural things, right? Where you come to a device with some idea about how to use it. And it can be very difficult to kind of disabuse people of their notion of how to use an interface. You may think that you have built something perfectly intuitive, but if somebody comes to your user experience from a different background than you were expecting, and particularly from having used different tools than you were expecting, you will have a very different experience. And so we talked about this a bunch way back on day one, where we had just like flipped through a bunch of UIs up on the screen, where we talked about the Yik Yak UI, where there's like all these buttons and pull down to refresh and hit this thing to rate. And it would be completely impossible if you came to that thing with no knowledge of how touchscreen UIs tend to work at this point. You know, if you just drop somebody from 1987 into it, they would be like, where's my mouse? Glass doesn't afford clicking. And you know, it's very, very interesting, I think, how people learn new interfaces. Just to briefly talk about screen-based interfaces. So it used to be that this was 99.9% of what you were developing. Now it's probably less than a third, I would guess. But the affordances of this sort of thing, where you have like a computer and a mouse and a keyboard, are that you can point and you can click and you can, you know, tap on every pixel using the mouse, and you can do that sort of thing. And it used to be the case that the physical affordances of screens were not particularly used. So touch screens on PCs is still relatively uncommon. And it wasn't that long ago that like nobody knew how anything worked with a touch screen. So again, it's all about kind of like the progression. People progressed as a culture from this thing to the like phone thing to the like tablet thing. And you needed all of those steps along the way for people to keep up, which is why it's often very difficult to take somebody that has fallen way behind the technology curve and say, here's your iPad. It's just too big of a leap because most people went through this very different progression, unless you happen to be very young. So, you know, here's another video. So I like that video. My favorite part about this, for those in the back who couldn't see very well, the child keeps doing the like pinch to zoom thing on the magazine and is like infuriated that it doesn't work. And I love it. I love that whole thing. It's wonderful. But so talk to me. What's happening there? What are we seeing? Yeah.
Okay, as someone who like grew up reading books for fun, like that actually really freaks me out. At what point will books become obsolete and like we just use touch screens for everything?
I got bad news for you. Yeah. Other thoughts? Yeah.
You can kind of see the trial and error that occurs when a user learns.
Yeah. So, this baby is not literally going to grow up not being able to figure out how a magazine works, right? That's an exaggeration of the point. But like there is this process where this particular child was more familiar with this thing than with this thing. And also, I think part of it here is just that they can't read anyways. So the iPad is fun, like it does things when you interact with it, whereas the magazine just sits there. Yeah.
I think if all she was allowed to do on an iPad was scroll, then she mightn't have had that much of problem trying to scroll through pages. It's aware that she pinched the zoom.
Yes, the pinch to zoom that really seems to be broken. Way back right.
I want to say that we can see how the technology can make contribute. So right now, a baby or something that before it is not common for the people, right now it's going to be common and useful for everybody.
One more.
It's also evidence that like user experience can become habitual. So like if Apple suddenly changed the way they use Zoom, a lot of like experienced Apple users would have a hard time like breaking that habit.
So you see this in waves in the mobile industry right now, and it's because of all the patent lawsuits going on. So for instance, right now on Android, you can't legally do highlighting of phone numbers to make them automatically dial in the phone book because Apple owns the patent for that. But you could do it for a long time on Android. And still, I find myself like clicking phone numbers and being like, why are you not dialing? Oh, right. Samsung lost a patent lawsuit to Apple. But like these things get ingrained in you really quickly. Like you get used to the way things work. And then when they stop working that way, it's different. It makes you sad. Any other questions on affordances? Signifiers? All right, so we're next going to talk a little bit about kind of where affordances come from. And this is a little bit more getting into like mental representations of systems. So users come to a system and quickly, as we were just talking about, develop some understanding of how it works, how you interact with it, what you can do with it, that sort of thing. And they bring with them a massive amount of kind of preconceived notions of how the thing should work based on how other things that they've experienced before worked. And while there is a utility to like telling people explicitly, like, okay, if you want to do X, hit Y, it shouldn't be necessary. You want your systems to be kind of inherently learnable. And you want the interface to communicate for you the proper model so that not only can the user like use it by experimentation and working with the thing, but they can actually like really deeply understand how the thing works. It helps people when they make errors to be able to recover. It helps people when they are trying to do something outside of their normal routine with the technology to have some notion of like how the thing really deeply works. So there's this classic example in Norman about the refrigerator that has a freezer and a fresh food section. And you have a problem where the freezer is too cold, but the fresh food is just right. How do you go about solving that problem? And I will tell you that you have two controls. You have one labeled freezer, and you have a dial to choose between A to E, and one labeled fresh food, and you have another dial that goes between 3 and 7. Actually, I think it goes 0 to 7. I just ran out of room. How do you go about making the fresh food, whatever I said? What did I say? How do you go about making the fresh food stay the same, but the freezer warmer? Buy a modern freezer. Buy one that came out after the design of Everyday Things. Yeah.
Intuition would say, oh, I just go to the freezer and I change that up.
Yeah, so you might think that you just need to mess around with one of these things. And that might be reinforced by the instructions, which say something like this, where like, yeah, your average everyday setting is C and 4, and if you want to be colder, it's C and 5 or 6. And by the way, I checked my refrigerator last night, and it's still not too far from this. It still sort of works the same way, and I have like a shiny stainless steel, nice, made in the past couple years sort of refrigerator. All right, so you've done your reading, so maybe you know the answer to this, but you would think that these are just kind of two independent things. We're like, all right, I can set the temperature of the freezer, and I can set the temperature of the refrigerator. And if I want to make the freezer less cold, I'm just going to go this way, and I'm going to leave the other one alone, and everything will be perfect. Hooray. Not so. In this particular model of refrigerator, in fact, the number selects how hard the motor is working, and then the letter is a diverter that sends more or less of the cold air between the freezer and the refrigerator compartment. And so what you end up with here is this like wildly complicated system where small adjustments that you make to either control can have radical impacts on the state of both halves of the thing. You can make the freezer radically different or the refrigerator radically different by adjusting either of these things, which is not entirely intuitive. Yeah?
The two other points that they brought up in the reading, which was kind of sad, was the person said it would have to take 24 hours for it to adjust. And by then, would you even remember what you changed it from to?
Yeah, so learning about the system is difficult because it's hard to experiment against. And we'll talk about that tomorrow, Thursday, whatever the next one is, when we talk about kind of design implications of all this stuff. By the way, that's what we're doing here. We're getting all of your cog-sci out of the way today, and then we're going to do all the design stuff on Thursday. All right, how would you go about fixing this? That's really the fundamental question. At a high level, there's two options, right? You either change the system so that it makes more sense to the average user, or you change the user. You educate the user about how the thing actually works. So this is all within the realm of conceptual models. And this is broadly the world that we're working in here. You, the designer, have some intention. You want to build a system that does X, and you do it in way Y. The user, unfortunately, doesn't get to come and discuss that with you. The user just works with whatever artifact you've produced, whatever the outcome of your design process was. And so they come to your thing with some idea about how things work, and with all these cultural and everything else built into them experiences that we've been talking about. And then they get to have some loop going on here where they play with the thing and then they decide whether it works in the way that they thought it was going to work. And if it doesn't, they can adjust their model and go back and work with it some more. And what we are working on is just making it so that your model as a designer and the model that the user gets when they first encounter your device match as well as possible. That's really the goal here, is to educate people about the system by tapping into what they already know and making your thing more learnable. Cool? So again, this is all just about what people bring to the table already. If you already have some idea, as we were talking about earlier, like when I turn my key this way, my car starts, maybe building something in an unrelated UI where you turn the key this way to start the process is wrong. If you are modeling something that is kind of like an ATM, well, you'd be wise to kind of act like an ATM in terms of your user experience. And the goal here at the end of the day is just to be able to predict a priori whether something will be a good design or not. And so where are we right now in the iterative design cycle? What are we talking about here? There's only 3 steps. This is an easy question. Yes. Well, so all right. So we have this like iterative design cycle. These 3 arrows we talk about a lot.
Oh, that one.
All right. Which arrow are we on right now? Design. So it's this design, prototype, evaluate thing. And what we're trying to do here is make the design as good as possible so that we're not just guessing when we go out to prototype and then evaluate the thing. You could imagine a design cycle where you just make something up here. And indeed, sometimes you don't have any good ideas, so you do just make something up here. But we're trying to do better than that. We are trying to bring what we know about the world and how people learn interfaces to bear on the problem, so that we get a good design for our prototype, so that we can evaluate, so that we can learn as much as possible on each kind of lap around the iterative design cycle. So this is about making predictive models of what will and will not work. So if you know something about teapots, or you know something about how screws work, you can look at these things and say, no, that doesn't do a teapot thing. And no, that's not going to do the like screw thing. These just don't work. And so you can say that because you have some knowledge about the world. You know how a teapot works and that that thing ain't a teapot. And so bringing that to bear on your own user interface is what we're talking about here. And remember that the preconceived models that people bring with them are often wrong. They quickly build some idea of how your interface works by interacting with only a very small part of it. Famous parable, read it on your own time, elephants. And then people find a way to justify things. So this is the number one thing you'll find if you really dig into user studies in this semester, is that when you hand somebody a UI and they work with it, they will make a guess about how it works really fast. Like within the first 10 seconds, they will decide how this thing works. And then when it keeps not working the way they think it does, it's broken, or this must be a bug, or this was working earlier. That's the one that's you hear all the time in user studies, and it's never true. When somebody like tries to do something and they do it like 100 times, they're like, oh, earlier this worked. No, that never worked. That's not a thing. And people will just really work hard to justify their own mental model of how the world works, even if the evidence is staring at you in the face and saying, no, that's not at all how the world works. Questions about conceptual models? I don't want to dwell on this too long because it was in the reading. If you didn't do the reading, go do the reading. It's important. And this is really what separates. In this class, we're not going to talk very much about design, despite the title of the course. Most of what we talk about in this course is the task analysis, need finding stuff, and the prototyping stuff, and the evaluation stuff. Because design is more of an art, and there's more kind of practice to it than sitting in a lecture and learning about it. But the one part that I can convey to you through readings and lectures about design is the sort of cognitive part of it, where you just have some understanding of what the world looks like. All right, a few administrative items. So everybody is done with Design 1.1 and Programming 1. Grades have been released on B courses for Design 1.1. Very exciting. If on that assignment or any other assignment you want to request a regrade, you need to write something up about why you think the grade is wrong and why you think you deserve a regrade. Put it on paper and hand it to me. That's how we're doing regrades. Then I will pass that along to the head GSIs. Congratulations on finishing up Programming Assignment 1. Yay! Very exciting. There are still fewer submissions on Programming Assignment 1 than people currently in the class. So if you think you submitted Programming 1, but you're not totally sure, you might go check. Make sure your thing is there on hackster.io. If you submitted on Hackster but forgot to submit the link on B courses, go do that. So there's just a field on B courses where you're supposed to submit the URL. to your Hackster.io project. Go and do that now if you haven't already done it. We won't count it as late or anything. We just need that link so that we can find your thing when we go to grade all of them. A few of you guys got your assignments backwards. So some people put the programming assignment under design 1 and vice versa. So go and check that and send us an email if you know where your thing is, but we might not know where your thing is. And if you are intending to stay in the class and didn't do the programming assignment, come and talk to me and let me know why. I'm curious. Yeah, any other questions about programming 1? Yeah.
So let's just say we wanted to change something with a Hackster submission, order of things, the title. Are we allowed to do that?
I wouldn't, because I assume that updates the timestamp. Everybody will learn from this process. I think about half of you ended up with YouTube links that don't click, or YouTube videos that didn't quite embed, and things like that. On the next one, you'll do better, and then by the time we get to the group project, which is really the point of all this, you'll be all Hackster.io'd up. Yeah.
To submit the code, that was just adding an extra file on eCourses, or was that?
On Hackster was the idea. So add it as an attachment to the Hackster.io project. If you didn't do that, let us know. Yeah, everybody's learning this submission process, myself included. So we will be as lenient as we can be on kind of gathering all the pieces back together for that particular assignment. For Thursday, I'll try to round up a few of my favorite solutions. There were some really interesting answers to the problem. And then there were 700,000 single slider and 2 sets of radio buttons. They were all fun. Other thoughts, questions? All right, due tomorrow is design assignment 1.2. This seems to have baffled a few of you. So the idea is just that you jot down some ideas to solve a problem that somebody in your interviews suggested. You select one of them, you do a quick low fidelity prototype of it. So we're talking about a paper prototype or sketches or storyboards, whatever kind of low fidelity thing you're comfortable with, and then just go and show it to somebody. And go and show it to a person out there in the world. Suck it up. Don't talk to your dorm mates. Yeah.
So it can just be sketches. It doesn't have to be something tangible.
Do whatever you think you need to do to learn something interesting. You may find that having a handful of sketches that you can switch between is enough to be a compelling low fidelity prototype. Definitely nobody should be programming anything. No code, no Photoshop, just sketches and paper prototypes, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Is it okay if it's really specific to sort of the person we talked to in the first part? It only applies to their job.
Sure. Yeah. Why not? Yeah.
Can it also not apply to them at
all? Yes, although it would be nice if you could draw some sort of narrative arc between these where you say I learned something from the experience of part 1, and so thus part 2. Yes?
Would it be weird if we showed our prototype back to the person who originally suggested the problem?
No. I mean, if you can find them, great. Some of you I know just picked random people on the street. Good luck finding them, but yeah. Ask on Piazza. That's more of a whoever's grading that assignment question than a conceptual question. Anything else? You'll be fine. Go do it. It's fun. This is intended to be just kind of fun and engage you in the process of design so that when you're going through this later in the semester and it's stressful and you have a group of people around you, you can think back to when it was fun. Programming assignment number 2 will be coming sometime this week. I think it will be due at the end of next week. It will be not meaningfully heavier than the first one. The goal of these kind of individual programming assignments is just to introduce you to kind of different parts of the Canoma stack that might come up as you do your final project. And this one in particular will be interacting with web services. So it's about going out and fetching data from the cloud and presenting it in some interesting way. Group assignments are coming soon, probably over this weekend, although we will certainly start building the lists tomorrow, probably. So if you're going to drop for sure, do it ASAP. Probably you're not sitting here if you're dropping today, but if you are, drop today. We'll be sad to see you go. If you have any questions or concerns about the course, come and see me. Now that individual programming 1 is done, I'm hoping that I can have like an office hour where I talk about HCI instead of talking about for loops. So if you want to come and say hi, come and say hi. I'm also going to post on Piazza some virtual office hours this week. I've got that sorted out. So let me know if you have any concerns. And if you're on the fence and thinking about dropping, let me know now so that we can just account for that in the group making process. You'll all love your groups. It's going to be super fun. It'll be awesome. Questions, thoughts, concerns, fear? Yeah.
Any way we can give feedback about the JS documentation?
Sure.
Like right now, or
Post on, I would suggest posting on the Canoma forums. The people that need to see it will see it if you do that. Nobody is suggesting that it's perfect, so feedback is welcome. If anybody of you want to come and work for Canoma and write documentation, let me know. Yeah. Anything else? Cool. What else is interesting right now? Yeah, that's about all. All right, so next up, the action cycle. Who knows what the action cycle is? I think this was in your reading. Maybe, maybe not. Great, new content. Everybody take notes? All right, so the action cycle is just this thing we were talking about earlier, where users interact with systems and then learn something from having interacted with the system and then update their mental model based on that. And we have this notion of the gulfs of execution and the gulf of evaluation. And broadly, imagine that this is the mental model of the person and this is the actual physical system. And this is a person trying to figure out how this thing does. And so the gulf of evaluation is the difficulty in figuring out the current state of the system, figuring out what it is trying to tell you. Whereas the gulf of execution is about the difficulty of acting against the physical system. All right. So evaluation is a perceptual thing, a readability thing. Execution is a usability thing. It's like, how effective can I be in actually doing a thing? And so an example of the gulf of evaluation, if I were to just hand you some X and Y values and ask you, are X and Y correlated? How quickly can you do this? Quick, are X and Y correlated? I don't know, maybe. Not obviously. All right, so here we have a kind of largish gulf of evaluation. It's difficult in this system to quickly perceive the meaningful information. There's a smaller gulf if I were to give this to you as a scatter plot. Now with a scatter plot, you can look at this and you can say, I don't know, it doesn't look very correlated. And so much narrower gulf of evaluation. And then a even narrower version would be a system that just tells you hey, here's Pearson's correlation coefficient. It's 0.1673. Are those correlated? No, no. Good. That's bad. That's a bad correlation coefficient. All right, so this is what the gulf of evaluation is about. It's just about how quickly, rapidly, easily can you perceive the important, salient information about a system. Gulf of execution goes the other way. So say you want to draw this tilty rectangle here. How would you go about doing that? Well, in a physical, mechanical way, you might say, I want to draw this line from that point to that point, and then draw this line, and then draw this line, and then draw this line. Or you might say, I'm going to draw it like this, and then I'm going to rotate it. There's different ways you could do it, but that level of specificity is kind of difficult. You have to know a lot about exactly where you want the endpoints. It's a large gulf of execution. A more abstract but smaller gulf way of doing this would be to say, just draw a rectangle and then rotate that rectangle. Draw a rectangle X big and then rotate it. And then an even smaller gulf of execution is something like a direct manipulation interface where you just grab two corners and stretch and manipulate it like that to draw your rectangle. All right. So again, this is about like the difficulty of specifying to the system what you want to do and getting your ideas down, quote unquote, on paper into the system in whatever way, however it works. All right. So the goal of evaluation, this one is about signifiers. It's about like how easily can I read a interface and figure out what it's trying to tell me and what I can do with it. And then the goal of execution is about affordances and about usability and about the utility of the system. So doing meaningful things with it based on what you've learned from looking at it. And just to emphasize a point that keeps coming up throughout this lecture, these goals are not completely under the control of the designer. This is partly the design of your system, but then partly whatever your user brings to the table with them, whatever their preconceived notions about how a thing works are. So just to point that out really clearly, like that coefficient of correlation there, if that means something to you, if you've had that math class and you know what correlation is and you know what like an R value is, then that interface is really super clear, makes it super easy to answer the question, are these two data sets correlated? If you don't know what that number means, then it's completely useless. Whereas maybe looking at the scatter plot, you could have told something interesting about it. So just keep that in mind, that it's, as with all these things, a relationship between user and system design. All right, so this is the cycle. And this is another Norman thing, the action cycle. It's deeper in the design of everyday things. But the story that he tells of where this came from is from watching a room full of academics try to figure out how to use a old-fashioned film projector, where you have your, it used to be when you wanted to present at a conference, you would sometimes come in with like your reel of film, physical like spindle of film. I'm not anywhere near old enough to be telling this story authentically, but anyway, you would walk in and you would put the thing on and then you would like wind the film and it would film something, I don't know. And anyway, the point of the story is that he was watching these people figure out how to use it. And think about what you usually do when you walk up to a system and you have no idea how to use it. What do? Yeah, just start hitting things, right? Like, interface. By the way, that's the difference between people that are like good at technology and people that are bad at technology, is like the people that are good at technology are willing to hit all the buttons, and the people who are bad just get scared and aren't willing to hit all the buttons. You know you're getting old when you stop being willing to hit the button. So don't ever do it. All right, so you start with a goal. Your goal is like, I want this thing to project my film onto the screen. And you sit there and you're like, all right, well, I don't know how to do that. So I'm just going to try some things and see what happens. So I'm going to execute some actions, and then I'm going to see what happened, and then I'm going to read back the results of how my actions change the world, and I'm going to proceed. And that sort of looks in detail like this. So when you go up to the thing, you're like, all right, what should I do? All right, I'm going to try X. And then you formulate a way to actually like do X, and then you do it. And then you look at the world and you say, how did it change? You perceive the state of the world, you make some interpretation. And this, of course, is where all these like pre-existing cognitive models come into play, is in coloring the way that you interpret what you're seeing from the state of the world. Then you evaluate what happened there, and now you set a new goal. Like, all right, I made some progress, but it's not quite working yet. Let's try some other stuff. This is really like basic, but it's super important to understanding how people actually work with interfaces. And as soon as you start doing like real user studies, you just see this over and over and over again as people try to figure out how your thing works. Questions? Okay. On to cognition. So all of those cog scientists, raise your hand again. All right, now take two hands and put them in your ears and go la 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 for like 5 minutes while I try to cover cognition. It's going to be awesome. By the way, I'm having ongoing competition with myself to find the best Flickr pictures for these slides. This is my current favorite. It's 2 stuffed animals playing chess, two stuffed monkeys playing chess with each other. If anybody can do better than that for cognition, I dare you. All right, so Jeff Raskin was the optional reading, and where Norman kind of goes in a like pop design direction occasionally, a common critique of Norman, fair or not, is that he tends to challenge existing designs without kind of doing any design himself. That's what you often hear of Norman. Raskin's way on the other side. So Raskin is the like details, cognitive science, cognition guy. He died in 2005, but very fascinating person to read about, and I really strongly recommend the Humane Interface if this is like a career path that you're interested in. Anyway, so you may be familiar with ergonomics. Ergonomics is about making products kind of fit people physically and fit people's like physical capabilities. So designing, car seats such that almost everybody can fit in them, and making things that are comfortable for the majority of the population that will use them. Cognetics is broadly defined as the ergonomics of the mind. So it's the study of the engineering scope of our mental abilities, and it is arguably applied cog-sci. So it's about taking what we know about what people are like physically of, and then encoding the.
What's that thing he was wearing?
Yeah, what is that Raskin's got there? I mean, it's like a not quite Google Glass, but it had to have been like really not quite, because it had to have been 2003 or earlier, probably. I don't know. I'm gonna guess it's like a heads-up display sort of thing. I can find out. All right. So one of the big takeaways from this part of the Humane Interface is about kind of cognitive conscious and unconscious actions. And so, quick, what is the last letter of your first name? Okay, so this is a thing that like you didn't have to go look it up, right? And yet it's not something that you were like actively thinking about before I asked you. There's no reason you would have been kind of accessing that part of your brain unless you just like happened to be thinking about it. So now you are thinking about it, and you're like, oh, that's curious. Like, why? Why is a strong last letter of your first name? Whatever comes to mind when you're thinking about that. Now it is at least on your mind. And if I ask you about your shoes, suddenly all you'll think about is shoes. And if I ask you, how a particular movie made you feel, then suddenly that all comes back to you. It's all there, right? But it's maybe not what you were thinking about before. So it's just about things that you consciously or unconsciously think about. We have a broad term for this, which is the locus of attention. And it's this notion that you can actively and intently think about kind of one thing at a time. And whatever that one thing is, it's what's dominating your kind of active consciousness and processing center. And it's what you are dealing with as opposed to all the other noise in the environment. A classic example is that like rooms tend to have like a background noise. So if we're like really quiet, you'll hear some noise in this room. Okay, it's kind of like fans and okay. That's been there this whole time, but we don't think about it very much. It's not something that you attend to. And as a result of your inattention, it just fades away and you don't worry so much about it. Like you're worried about the slides or me or your phone or whatever it is that you're kind of actively doing. And you're not attending to the background noise. But if I tell you, like, for the next 5 minutes while I'm talking, don't pay attention to me, just listen to that, then you could do that. Like if you really wanted to do that, you could. Why do we say the locus of attention as opposed to focus? Focus implies that you're kind of actively choosing. It implies some volition of like, this is what I want to do next. Whereas when we think about locuses of attention, you can think of your mind wandering between different things, or if somebody popped a balloon all of a sudden at the back of the room, and if I had planned better, I would have had somebody at the back of the room with a balloon to pop right there, then you would suddenly attend to it, but you wouldn't be thinking about attending to it. It's just something that naturally happens. And so attention can be either this sort of active thing, or if you really want to dig into your pop psychology, go read Csikszentmihalyi's book Flow, which is all about kind of like how people engage in series of activities while maintaining a locus of attention between them. I don't believe most of what that book says, but it's very interesting if you are into that side of the world. So why do we care in design? Well, it's important because you really can't be actively conscious of more than one task at a time. And so if you are wanting somebody to attend to something, you need to make sure that it is actually their locus of attention at the time. We talked earlier about like this habit-forming ability of user interfaces. You want to make sure that you can break people of that if you actually need their attention. So the canonical example of this is, say you have something that a user does 1,000 times a day, and you think it's really important that they think carefully about whether they really want to do that thing. And so you put up a confirmation dialogue that's like, are you sure? Yes or no? And if you have somebody going through that 1,000 times a day, they're just going to ignore it. They're always going to hit yes. And at that point, you are no longer the locus of their attention, and you're no longer accomplishing what you were hoping to accomplish with that confirmation box. You're just adding one extra click to something that's happening automatically. See, I planned that one. So that's the idea there. And you can take advantage of these things. Seriously, stop it. You can take advantage of these things by knowing when your user is going to be focused on something other than your system. And so say you have a whole lot of like background processing to do, or you need to download a big file or something. You could be doing that while somebody is like actually doing something consciously on the screen. There's a really good example of that, which is that way back, people actually read terms of service, read like EULAs. Okay, I know that's crazy, but people used to like actually sit there and read the like end user license agreements when you install software. And so what people used to do is they used to do a bunch of background processing behind it. They would like install the application while you were sitting there reading the terms of service. And then when you finally got done with it, you'd hit OK, and it'd be like, hooray, we're already done installing the thing for you. Go enjoy Word 92 or whatever the hell you just installed. Now you can't use that trick anymore. You can't like background download things while people are reading the EULA because nobody bothers to read the EULA. Questions, thoughts, cognition? Again, this is all about kind of making concrete models of how people work and being able to make useful predictions about how a design will work so that you can then go out into the world and have a better design than you would have had if you were just guessing. Cool? Thoughts, questions, concerns? Questions about assignments? Okay. Next time, we're going to dig into the design implications of all the things that we talked about today. So what do you do with your knowledge of affordances and signifiers and conceptual models and the action cycle and cognetics? How does that actually influence your design? And what can you bring to bear on design to make that happen? The reading assignment for Thursday is something on direct manipulation, which is all about kind of bringing what we know about the action cycle into user interface design. Next week, we will, on Tuesday, talk about connected products. And then on Thursday, we're going to do our group brainstorming session. So this is your fair warning now that next Thursday's lecture is required because we will be doing like a full hour-and-a-half long in-class exercise next Thursday. Cool. Anything else? See you Thursday. Hi.
I just had a quick question on the whole affordance versus signifier.
Uh-huh.
So when we're relying on